Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and here we explore the intersection of storycraft and game design. Today I'm thrilled to welcome John Ryan, an accomplished game writer and narrative designer. With extensive experience in the gaming industry, John brings invaluable insights into just what it takes to build a successful career in the game development industry. Today we're going to explore the importance of strong writing foundations, the significance of curiosity in understanding the game-making process, and how to navigate feedback and personal identity in this ever-evolving field. Well, let's get at it. John, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You were on my list of people to hunt down for quite a while now, ever since back in the Narrative Department's masterclass and getting to see your brilliant mind and work back then, but on top of all the games you've worked on. But we'll get into all that. But before we get going, I do want to kind of just set a foundation. I like to know your origin story. How did you get into game writing? What initially drew you into the field? How'd you get your shot? What was your journey from there to here? All that fun stuff.
Oh, sure. I never thought about going into game writing because, and this will date me, I came of an age when games were usually written by one or two people, and that was something where they did everything. They did music, they did art, they did programming, and they did writing. And so when you see like this game was written by so-and-so, they literally wrote the game, not just the narrative.
Right.
And I thought, that's not me. I don't have that sort of programming background. I don't have that. So it became something else when I went into journalism and I went into prose writing. And it wasn't until, and I have to say, I have to warn people about this. I don't recommend this, but I answered an ad in Craigslist. And this was back when Craigslist wasn't terrible. And it was looking for somebody who knew video games and who could write. And I was doing a freelance video game review column for MSNBC.com at the time. And I said, take a shot. And a couple weeks later, I was pinged. And a month after that, I ended up working at Microsoft Game Studio. And I was working on, this was 2007. I started 2 days after Halo 3 came out. So it was a completely bonkers time in that studio. And I ended up doing what we now call transmedia. And it wasn't called transmedia back then. But I ended up working with different departments inside Microsoft Game Studio who were working with their external partners. And that would be like Epic for Gears of War, BioWare when they were still with Microsoft for Mass Effect 1. And I ended up working on Fable 2. And I did transmedia for that. And then one day, the editor that we had on site for Fable 2 came running down the hallway into my office. And she looked at me and she said, "You're funny, write something." And she threw me a spreadsheet and said, "You have an hour to write these item descriptions and barks." And it's like, I don't know how to do this, but okay. And so cue Kermit flailing gif at the typewriter. And I sent it out and she came back and said, "You made me laugh. Good job." And I was like, I was sweating from like having to knock all this out in short order. And it didn't hit me until I was driving home that night where it was like, I wrote for a video game. And that was all it took. As you can guess, I didn't really have any formal training in video game. It's not like now. I mean, this was kind of an era where it was still a little bit wild. In fact, one of the writers who worked at Microsoft that I worked with back in the day, they didn't have any narrative support. He was hired from their database division because he had an English background and he knew how to write. And so it was a little bit punk, a little bit garage band type of an arrangement, even at Microsoft back in the day. Yeah, and it was a place where I understood that this could be a career, and I worked with a lot of amazing people who have gone on to do big things, and I sort of just sat at their feet and learned. And I didn't really get the chance to exercise this until about a couple of years later when I was hired by ArenaNet, and they were getting deep into the production of Guild Wars 2. And so I came on as a junior writer, and that's really where my formal education began.
Wow. So what was the path from there to today? What were some of the highlights, the milestones, just to bring us up to date?
Guild Wars 2 I was at ArenaNet for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something where, again, it was a little bit punk because the studio had never done anything that big. It was going to be a live service game. And so we were kind of figuring out, like, getting this massive beast to launch was one thing. Getting people to come back and keep playing it was another. So that was really my exposure to live service, regular content updates, episodic storylines. And man, yeah, we were, I don't want to say we were making it at the fly because we actually had some ideas to do this, but we were all sort of in uncharted waters together. And that's both terrifying and fun. After that, I left and I went to go join Bungie because they had just launched Destiny, and they were looking to beef up their narrative because when it launched, it didn't exactly get high praise and narrative. So they were putting together their own sort of Avengers team and a lot of them worked in the MMO space. And I came on as their editor and, working with the narrative team, just everything from origin ideas all the way to like getting the words to the pipeline, editing, working with the narrative team for transmedia type stuff, all of that for House of Wolves, Taken King, and beyond. I was told I showed up in the credits for Destiny 2. I didn't really do anything for Destiny 2, but okay, thanks guys. So then it was a little bit start and stop, I will admit. And I had taken a couple jobs outside the industry, and then I came back to work Turn 10. I returned to Microsoft, where I was the lead writer for Forza Motorsport 7, which is something I never thought I'd say out loud because Forza Horizon is the more sort of loosey-goosey, sort of like a little bit more, your kid brother, like on a sugar high type thing, whereas Forza Motorsport is a little bit more restrained in a leather armback chair with a glass of port and a good book. And it's sort of like they wanted to take an approach into narrative, and I was like, all right, let's see what we can do. So this was more of an experiment that was really interesting and fun. And it was like the first time I really had sort of a lead type thing outside of something like Guild Wars when I was doing like small lead type projects there, or being the narrative lead on small projects there, where I was responsible for what came out. This was like me, spotlight, all of this. And after that, I eventually packed my bags and went to Europe, where I worked for Guerrilla on Horizon Forbidden West, the sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn. I have never seen so many amazing people working on a project that was so big. I've worked with great people on great projects, but the scale of this thing was just so massive that it gave you kind of a vertigo to see how many things were going on at once. And I will never, ever stop being in awe of like the Monster Robot Division team, like all the stuff that they did. It was just, they're mad scientists, but they're using it for a force of good, right?
Right on.
And after that, I ended up with actually an old colleague of mine from Microsoft, a guy by the name of John Sutherland, working at Tactile Games in Copenhagen, where I did a lot more narrative-driven, episodic work in the mobile space, which really, man, that was an education because everything is like 100 times faster. You are constantly developing, iterating, publishing, postmortem, all in a cycle, all within like days of each other. And that train is always moving. And that taught me a massive economy of scale and speed, which I admit, in the past, I was kind of down on mobile gaming because it's kind of like, oh, we're AAA, we're PC. Yes, we're the true game people. Nah, man. Mobile is boot camp. Mobile is something where, narratively speaking, if you can find a good mobile place to work at, it will teach you so much about how to operate quickly and how to operate precisely. And that followed with me going to Berlin to work at Wooga for a while, and then coming back to the US. And in between all of that, I've been working on freelance projects. Some I can talk about, and some are fortunately under the NDA dome.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's quite the story, my friend.
It is. I've been very fortunate to have this life. I've been told that the average shelf life of people in game dev is 5 years. And as somebody who got into this game late, like in his 30s, this has been something 8-year-old me never would have expected.
Very cool. Well, that sets the stage really nicely. It segues into the conversation I want to have with you, which is around building a resilient career in the game dev world and writing for games, that kind of thing. Just talking about some of the topics, some of the experiences you've had along the way and what we can all learn from them, I suppose. So in you're often on LinkedIn, and I've heard you in conversation, and quite often you talk about strong writing fundamentals, how important those are and how essential they are for an aspiring game writer or writer in general. So let's set the foundation there. Let's build ourselves a bedrock. What are those fundamentals for you? Can you describe that for me?
Sure. Again, I came out of a journalism background. So the idea was, in journalism, you only had a finite amount of space to write and a finite amount of time to write. And you're also trying to keep people reading and to get people's attention. So it became a game of learning how to write fast, learning how to write evocatively, and learning how to write clearly. And I think that was, unbeknownst to me, the boot camp that was really training me to go into game writing. When I got started in game writing, really, I was, as I said, I was doing barks and I was doing item descriptions, and those have finite spaces, especially barks. You can't have a 3-sentence long bark, right? What you need to do is you need to have something that is to the point, that delivers some kind of personality, and that tells you a little bit about the world and conveys a sense of urgency or importance to the player. And you have to make it sound organic. You have to make it sound natural. So I think knowing how to have that sort of journalism background, or the skills that you pick up in something like journalism, is an excellent foundation. Going into journalism, I feel like that gave me a lot of space and skill to develop it. And I feel like you can go into game writing raw, but really what you need to do is you need to focus on those fundamentals. And if you just instead focus on game writing instead of writing, to me that feels like you want to bake a cake, but you're starting with the candles.
Right.
So I think it's what you bring to game writing as a fundamental will serve you well than just starting at scratch from game writing. Or like, there are people who I see who go into game writing who are just like copying barks and just trying to like decipher it that way. And it's like, you can do that, but what's going to help you go farther is having that foundation underneath you to begin with.
That makes sense. It reminds me of when people ask voice actors, how do I get into voice acting? And quite often the response is, learn to act. And then voice acting is just a type of that. It's like, you need to learn the basic craft first before you learn the specialized piece of it.
There's one thing that goes with that, and I'm not sure, maybe this works for voice acting and acting as well, is knowing how to take feedback.
Yes.
And this is where I think if you just go into like, if you go into something like game writing raw, you might not understand the high pressure environment and getting feedback. Whereas I came in through journalism where I had my skin flayed off far earlier before I got to game writing. So I think it's the idea of knowing how to take criticism, understanding the difference between criticism and constructive criticism, learning how to ask for feedback. It's like when somebody says, this sucks, you have to bottle up that gremlin inside you that wants to just go for their throat and say, okay, well, what do you mean by this sucks? And it's like, where did I lose you? Why doesn't this work for you? And to get people talking and to try to hear what it is that sucks. Because usually it's like people will have an answer for that. And if I've run into people who like couldn't really verbalize it, but it clicked in their head that they weren't giving me what I needed. And that became an education on both sides of like knowing how to give feedback and knowing how to accept feedback. So being zen about feedback, I think, will serve you well. And the other side of that is knowing how to be the solution. Like if you get feedback, okay, so what solution are you going to take to solve this? Or a problem comes up, your lead can't handle something, or something comes up, you need to report to your lead and say, I'm thinking about this as a solution, or you go ahead and do the solution. And hopefully you're not doing it out of ego, you're doing it because you have the right knowledge to fix the problem at the time. You want to be someone who is active in the solution of the problem. Even if you do it, or you talk to your lead and suggest like, this is what I think we could do to solve the problem. That plus being able to take dialogue is a good active, reactive way to be a valuable person in any space. But in the studio space, where things are constantly on fire, is like being able to keep your cool and being able to solve problems proactively and constructively. That I think will serve you well.
That's excellent advice and right on topic for building a resilient career. I love it. That's fantastic.
Well, sure. One of the things about like building a resilient career is right now the industry is going through a huge turbulent era. And there are a lot of people who are being let go. And there are a lot of people like, with broken hearts. And one of the things you have to know about being in this industry is you're probably going to be in a situation where you've done everything right. You've been great to work with. You didn't make a mistake and you still lose your job. The project gets canceled. The studio shutters due to bad management. And part of the resilience is not falling into that trap where you think it's you, where you think you're the problem. There comes a point, and I have struggled with this, I fully admit, where I don't know why things broke the way they did with hiring or with interviews or whatever, but you have to like not make yourself the villain of the piece. You have to understand, okay, things are tough right now. Try to get as much feedback as you can about why you didn't get the pick or what didn't go right, and work on it and get to a point where you feel like you've done the best you can, given all the information you have. Be the best person you can be a good human, and understand you could do all of that and still you'll miss out on opportunities. It's very easy, and I've seen a lot of people succumb to despair because, again, they thought they did everything right, and it didn't help. Like, we've seen studios launch games that have been really successful, and now the studio got axed. Like Tango Gameworks. Hi-Fi Rush was a beloved game last year. Presumably sold well, and it didn't matter in the end. It's easy to internalize that this is about you. And unless you literally set the studio on fire, it's probably not you.
Right.
So I would tell anybody who needs to hear this that if you are going through a hard time in the industry, if you've been laid off or whatever, try to avoid thinking that it's you, that you are this faulty unit. And it is hard sometimes to seek help, to find other peers, maybe get professional help, whatever, to make sure you don't internalize this, because that leads to inertia. That leads to you to stop being in love with the industry. That leads you to stop being creative, to stop being inquisitive, to stop enjoying life. So this whole era has been one where we've had to do a lot of education for ourselves and a lot of support for other people. And I think the hardest part is we don't know where it's going to end.
Yeah. Excellent advice, though. Very something everybody should keep in mind. Just to spin off that for a second, to go on a little side for a second, with the consideration for the nature of a career in this industry, you're obviously going to be moving from studio to studio at some point. What are the considerations for a writer when you go to a new studio? How do you make sure that you're prepared for a change in tone, practice, tools, like all of these things that change? How can you make sure that you stay prepared, resilient, considering these studio changes, these job changes?
I think one of the best ways to do it is to keep that curiosity and keep that sort of open-mindedness. Like, always think of yourself as the student. Never think, I know it all. I have never worked with the same tools twice in studios.
Crazy.
Yeah. It is something where you have to be a little bit flexible in that case. Every studio speaks its own language. So when you go in, you have to learn to listen all over again. Hopefully, in a perfect world, you would have a leadership team that would help like bring you up to speed, not just through like technical onboarding, not just all that stuff like that, but it's like there's a way a studio works and there's the real way a studio works, where there is like a lot of the sort of Game of Thrones intrigue that's happening underneath that you don't know about. And the idea is that they will help you manage that. It's like to help get you to understand when's the best time to talk to this producer, when is the best time to talk to this group. Like the art team is overloaded, so we can't really ask them for this right now. And so it's the skill of being able to tap into that underground information network, the vibe pipeline that exists in every studio. And again, hopefully you're going to have people on your side who will help plug you into that. Whether it is your team that is onboarding you, or other studios I've seen have an onboarding buddy, which is somebody outside your discipline who will meet with you and to help you get up to speed. And, you know, you'll go out for coffee or alcohol of your choice, and they'll sit down and they'll give you like the real scoop about what's happening. So there's a lot of things that you could do to listen and to prepare and to come in open-minded. You kind of have to sort of unlearn what you've learned at other studios. So don't try to be stubborn, or don't say, we did it this way. Like right up front. Like if there's if there's like a pipeline issue, if there's something coming on and you're all stumped, it's like, maybe this helped when I was at the studio, we did this. What do you think? And I don't know if you tried this before, but we did it this way. We had some success. And so it's the idea that you don't want to know everything. You really are in absorbing mode, and you kind of have to be a detective to see how things really operate, and then move with grace and diplomacy. You don't want to be the dick on day one.
No.
Yeah. So and again, hopefully you have this infrastructure that's going to help support you when you move from studio to studio. Done well, it can be relatively painless. Done not well, it can be agony.
You mentioned the importance of getting to know the other departments and creating those understandings and even bonds or friendships. What are some really good, I don't know, tools or things you've seen studios do to help that process?
Okay, so I'm going to call out a studio by name that did it really well, and it's Renet. And once upon a time, the writers were all siloed in a room together, and things would just be sort of thrown over the transom, and the writers would work on it, and then it would be gone. And my boss then realized that that is only getting you so far, and realized that we were seen as kind of the other. Like, we were the bring down, we were the thing that was changing the designer's words. We were, it was almost antagonistic. If you couldn't see us, it just felt like we were making fun of you and changing your words and putting them into the game. So what my boss did is he implemented embedding, where writers would be embedded with certain teams and certain maps, and you would be with like that development team. So you'd be with the artists, you'd be with the designers, you'd be with some programmers, you'd be with that cluster of people. And you got seen, and you got to see what people do, and you got to respect their labor. I want to repeat that line: respect their labor. You understand what they're going through, they're going to understand what limitations that you have, and that can build bridges where you didn't think you could build bridges before. So when you sit down and you have a meeting and you're like, okay, we have to figure out this big battle with the troll on the bridge, like, we've run into these issues. How do you, like, let's go around and let's try to figure out how we can collaboratively solve this. I know words. And you get a lot more buy-in that way. And you stop seeing each other as departments and seeing more as like other creative people. And it's not always easy. It's not always perfect. That's assuming everybody is a good actor and everybody is, bringing their best self. But more often than not, it works. When I started a million years ago, back when dinosaurs walked the earth at Microsoft, I was doing a transmedia project, and I was going to be web-based. And so I went to the designer who was assigned the project with me. And I walked in and I, for about 20 minutes, told her what this was going to be, how it was going to work, how it was going to operate. And when I got done, she just didn't care less. And it was just she looked at me like, right, whatever. And I was like, oh, tough crowd. So as I was driving home, I realized I was speaking to a designer and artist using words. So I stopped off at a local drugstore and picked up a sketch pad and colored pencils and etched out what it would be. It's like, okay, here's the home page. Here's we transition to here. If you click this here, you transition to here. And so I came in, and man, let me tell you, not being able to draw and showing an artist your drawings is humbling. But she saw it, and within 5 minutes, everything clicked, and we were at her whiteboard, and she was sketching out all these things about how this can all operate. And our relationship was far better after that. So when you are working with these different disciplines, you're going to understand and learn to speak their language a little better. And that's invaluable.
That kind of brings to mind a question, though, to spin off of the feedback point. At some point in your career, you're going to have to give feedback. Do you have any tips on how to do that right that allows you to be a good team player?
Okay, if it's something where it's going to be peer-to-peer like writer, it would be something where you first have to have the mindset of you not being on the opposite end of the table, you being sitting next to them.
Uh-huh.
And if it's something along the lines of you start off positive with things that you thought really worked. And you go through that and you let them see, it's like, this is where I think you're going well. This is where I think you're strong. You really killed this bit right here with characterization. And then you go in to say, what are the things that didn't work? Not the things that are wrong. I know it's splitting hairs, but there's a difference. Things that didn't work for you, or the things that you felt weren't strong. Not wrong, but didn't work. And then you go in and you list out what didn't go well in ways that say, I know you can knock this out. Let's figure a way around this so you can have a better idea about how to approach it for another draft. And go with it from there. the whole idea of like feedback is that you trust this person, that they'll be able to do the job to make this work. And the idea is you're the second set of eyes, and man, the level of trust at that table is huge. So it's one thing to say, like, treat these people how you'd like to be treated, but underneath it, there's that information layer about how you deliver the information. And especially if you're a senior and they're a junior, they are learning from you every second, like what to do, how to do it. And so you come away with solid points, clear points, and supportive points. And that, to me, was always a safe place to start.
So I'm hearing, learn the fundamentals, be a good team player, work on your communication, learn how to take and give feedback well, and separate your personal identity from the work. Don't take it personally.
Yeah. I would also add, be up to date on tools. Like right now, like we're seeing more and more Unreal come up in narrative design conversations. And once upon a time, like narrative design did technical implementation as well. And some studios, narrative design means that. Now you have a spinoff of narrative design, which is technical narrative designer, which is a lot more systems than story, even though they interact with the story elements. However, I think it will serve you well if you are able to go under the hood and understand how blueprints work, or like how like something like Twine works on a basic level, is that you're not afraid to understand how these tools operate. Because if something comes up and you're a writer or narrative designer and somebody was working on something and they're out sick or whatever, you need to go under the hood and take a look at their blueprint, you are going to be invaluable. So I don't think it would hurt. There's like, you can pick up Unreal for free, I think. And then there's like, I think at last count, 8 million metric tons of YouTube tutorials on Unreal. So there's a lot of things where you can actually, kind of teach yourself. And of course, like I did with Twine, like way back when, you can start making your own stuff, show it to nobody because it's going to like explode and catch fire and it'll be awful. But you are learning, you are in that learning curve, and it's okay to experiment and have something blow up. But you are gaining more knowledge every time you work at it. And I don't think a studio is going to expect you to create something wholly out of Unreal, just like, here's a new project, it's completely blank, build it. But I think they will appreciate that you're not afraid to open the hood and to delve in there and to either make or fix.
Brilliant. That makes total sense.
Yeah. And like, as you can imagine, once upon a time, that wasn't a thing for narrative, because you kind of had programming, like set everything up. And then you had a tool where you would input your lines, and then you'd feed them in, and it would go through like a Magic Wonka machine into the game itself. Now that Magic Wonka machine is now Unreal, and it's far more accessible than it used to be 10, 15 years ago.
All right. Well, if we were to bring this to a close, I guess this part of the conversation, I guess my question would be, what is the key takeaway? What is the thing that gives the person the most value in their position or the most resilient? What is, for you, what is that one key takeaway?
It changes. I think if you would have asked me like during COVID, I would have had a different answer. But I think knowing what we've seen now with the sheer carnage that is happening in the industry, it is to know when you have done your best, and don't think that you are a faulty, broken, like unhireable, unlovable thing. Keep moving forward. I understand the need to get a job because job equals money, and in American cases, healthcare too. But don't let that light go out in you about creating and writing and doing things like that. Don't let that stop. Like, find small things, even if you just write a page a day. I've been doing a journal entry every day for years just to keep that light going. And there are some times where it was really, really hard to write it, and other times where it was easier. And you need to find something that it still excites you and still makes you fall in love with the craft all over again. And you can draw inspiration from anywhere. So don't completely isolate yourself, don't wall yourself out, and don't think of yourself as this broken, terrible thing in the industry, because you are not.
Excellent. Well, that kind of wraps up the resilient part of the conversation. I do have some stuff I like to ask on the way as we start heading for the door. And one of them is a philosophical question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, regardless of the industry, career, what you do. I ask everybody this. So if you've listened to an episode recently, you've probably heard it. So hopefully you have something in mind. The question is, in my opinion, there exists this magical space at obviously the corner of story and game, but the intersection of improv, comic books, board game design, all of these things, where we can all just hang out, get along. There's a shared fellowship. There's a shared language. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, in your opinion, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
I would say it is some sort of emotional or logical buy-in. You feel invested to continue in a story, and you feel invested to continue in a game. There's something there that compels you to see what happens next. It's been a staple of fiction and plays for a long time. Television, film, the same way. Games are no different now, where they are finding a way for you wanting to go forward. And now we have this ability between story and game is to give narrative and emotional context to it.
That is a fantastic answer, and I haven't heard that one before. Thank you. All right, before we head for the door, I do like to do some quick fires just to get to know you a little bit better. What are you reading right now? What's on the bookshelves?
I am going through Jesse Schnell's book, Game Design. I try to read that once a year. I am reading The Boy on the Bridge, which is the prequel to the novel The Girl with All the Gifts. I was just tuned into that through Blue Sky, book Blue Sky, or Book Sky, I guess. And for some reason, I got my hands on Salem's Lot, the Stephen King novel, because there's a movie that just came on about it, and I realized I've never really read Salem's Lot. And that was like one of the big books that really pushed Stephen King into the limelight back in the 70s, so I thought I'd give that a shot.
That's an excellent book. I wouldn't say one of my favorite King books, but it is one of the good ones, in the top percentile for sure. What are you playing these days?
Oh, okay. So the Fiends at Power Wash Simulator just dropped a Halloween map, and I will say that Power Wash Simulator is one of the most addictive and subversively funny narrative storylines I've seen in quite a while. And so whenever something comes out, I just immediately go for that. I started last night the campaign for Call of Duty Black Ops 6.
Oh.
I've heard good noises about it, so I'm checking that out. I also have a couple of Sherlock Holmes games that I've been meaning to get to, so I will check that out.
Very cool. Okay, last quick fire. This one's the hard one. If your essence was perfectly distilled down and then injected into a game world or fiction world, so board game, tabletop role-playing game, video game, whatever, A, what would the world be? And B, what would your character, archetype, race, class, however you want to categorize that, what would John be in a game world?
Oh my God. Oh, geez. Man, I'm gonna say something like Stardew Valley. It's a wonderfully cozy game for a reason, and I love how the storylines and the characters just sort of evolve organically over time. And I also admire the designer's insane push to keep like doing updates, and I think that lends this feel to a living, evolving world. As far as what I would be, that's I would guess farmer. Like in that, I have no idea how to farm, but I think everybody in that game who's played it, especially if you come from a tech background, has longed to get that note that says, escape your dead-end soul-killing job and go out and touch grass. And I think in these times, we are all looking for that escape hatch. And I think that is sort of the universe I would want to be in. I've thought about all the games I've recently played, and it's like, I wouldn't do well in I wouldn't do well in the Doom universe. I don't think I would be much use as a black operative in Call of Duty. And I just thought, okay, what's the reality where I would feel happier and better and like have a community, and that would be it.
Fantastic. Okay, we're almost to the end. I do like to open up a little space right around here to let you, is there anything you want to promote, something you've done recently, something you've done in the past you want people to put their eyeballs on, or conversely, where can we find you online to keep an eye on what you're working on?
Sure. I am Blue Sky at John Ryan Writes, or I spend way too much time. I have a website called johnryanwrites.com where it is infrequently updated, but it has like a lot of the stuff that I've worked on in video form and PDF form as well. As far as like something I would like to highlight, I would like to talk about Ross Scott's project to stop killing games, which is a thing that he's been very passionate about in the past few years, where games, especially games that are in an online ecosystem, when the server goes down, you can't play that game anymore. And stuff that people have worked on, like maybe dozens or hundreds of people worked on, just vanishes. And we are, as an industry, notoriously terrible for not preserving our history. You could go to abandonware.com and you can see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games that would have just otherwise been forgotten if somebody didn't load them up there. We don't take care of our history. And I feel like, as I've been in this industry almost 20 years now, I hate to see stuff that I've seen other people work passionately on just vanish. It's not fair and it's not right. And also, you're killing an opportunity to inspire the next generation. There could be the next Hideo Kojima who will like see some like 90s fighting game and go, oh, I have a great idea for this. Or somebody who will be inspired by some 80s Commodore 64 game and say, okay, what if we did that? Mm-hmm. And we preserve film in this country. Like Library of Congress will pick films that are significant to the culture and preserve them. But we also have amateur archivists and preservationists who also like try to find out and to repair film, especially old film, which is on, degradable stock. Games are far more ephemeral and vanish far too quickly. So I would take a look in something like Stop Killing Games, and I would take a look and sing about how you can keep game history alive.
Love it. I will throw links in the show notes so people can go check all that out.
Cool.
That, my friend. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for this. Thank you for in letting me ramble about game preservation and all this. It's been fantastic to be on your show.
Oh, thank you for coming along for the ride. I love this stuff as much as you do, and I love hearing the stories and the behind-the-scene takes. But before I push you out the door, out into the cold, I do also like to give you the last word. Do you have any final parting words of wisdom, something you say as you head across the threshold?
Be kind. Just be kind.
I'm afraid it's time for me to close up shop once again. The tavern's hold on this plane is beginning to weaken, and you should probably go before I shift off to God's nowhere. But before we go, I want to once again thank John for stopping by and sharing your insights and wisdom. We are all better off for having listened to your stories. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, keep creating, sharing, and exploring those stories and worlds. Stay safe, Wanderer. your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.